Okay, so this is going to sound like a dumb question, but did we actually hunt the Neanderthals to extinction? Because growing up, that always just felt like settled history. Smarter humans show up, brutish cavemen lose, end of story. Almost a sports score. Humans, 1. Neanderthals, 0. Roll the highlight reel, cue the smug narrator voice. Except the more I dug into this, the weirder the real story got. Because the "we won" framing might be backwards, in kind of an uncomfortable way. We didn't just beat them. A lot of us are, genetically, partly them. Some of you reading this right now are quite literally a little bit Neanderthal. Sorry, surprise. So the standard story goes like this. Around 40,000 years ago, modern humans, us basically, spread into Europe, where Neanderthals had already been living just fine for a few 100,000 years. We were apparently smarter, better with tools, maybe just better hunters. And within a few thousand years, Neanderthals were gone. Convenient narrative, tidy ending, slightly smug if you ask me. The smarter part doesn't even hold up that well, honestly. Back in 2018, a researcher named Dirk Hoffman led a team that used a dating method called uranium-thorium dating on cave paintings in 3 different caves in Spain, including one called La Pasiega. Some of that art, geometric shapes, hand stencils, animal outlines, turned out to be at least 64,800 years old. Problem is, modern humans didn't actually show up in that part of Europe until roughly 20,000 years later, which leaves exactly 1 species around to have painted it. Not everyone in the field is fully sold on that dating method, to be fair. There's real pushback on it. But even as a contested claim, it says something that the leading theory for who painted this is now maybe the supposedly dumb guys. But here's where it stops adding up for me. If this was really a clean takeover, humans roll in, Neanderthals lose, roll credits, you'd expect to find an actual body count somewhere. Mass graves, weapons everywhere, the forensic version of a movie poster. We don't really have that. What we do have, weirdly, is evidence that a lot of the time, instead of fighting, the two groups were getting together. That kind of getting together. There's DNA proving it. There are skeletons with mixed features that suggest mixed parentage. There's actually one specific kid I can't stop thinking about. Back in 1998, in Portugal, an archaeologist named João Zilhão found the burial of a small child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, stained in red ochre, buried with little shell beads. When a Neanderthal specialist named Eric Trinkhaus examined the bones, he found this odd mix, the jaw and body proportions reading distinctly Neanderthal, but other features reading distinctly modern human. Their argument was that this wasn't a one-off fling between 2 lonely individuals. It was a kid born from populations that had been mixing for a while. People genuinely fought about this one for years, but it held up. Apparently, extinction might be the wrong word for a chunk of what happened here. Maybe the better word is absorption. Okay, this is the part that really got me. There's a geneticist, Diendo Masalani, over at Yale, who's been going through ancient Neanderthal genomes, basically reading these incredibly old genetic diaries. And what he and his team found is kind of bleak, honestly, in a way that has nothing to do with us at all. In one cave in Siberia, Chigirska Cave, they found a small community, maybe 13 people, and the DNA shows a father and his own daughter were both living there. Not as some one-off tragedy, as apparently just kind of how things worked when your population gets this small. After running the numbers, Masalani's team dropped their estimate of the total Neanderthal population everywhere down to somewhere around 2,400 breeding individuals total, for an entire species spread across a continent. I don't know if 2,400 sounds small to you, but that's roughly the population of one tiny town. A whole species running on a tiny town's worth of people for something like 350,000 years. So before we even get to whether humans showed up and finished the job, Neanderthals may have already been living on a kind of biological knife's edge for most of their existence, which weirdly connects to something else I read. Svante Pääbo, the scientist who eventually won a Nobel Prize for this, was the one who first proved that instead of just replacing Neanderthals, a chunk of modern humans outside Africa quietly absorbed some of their genes through actual interbreeding. So extinction might not even be fully accurate here. Some of it just became us.
And once you go down this rabbit hole, it keeps getting weirder. The interbreeding thing isn't some tiny rounding error either. If your ancestors are from outside Africa, you're apparently carrying somewhere around 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, sitting in you right now. Some of it affects your immune system. So somewhere in there, a Neanderthal you've never met is quietly helping you fight off a cold. You're welcome, I guess, ancient cousin.
Quick comfort break, because I almost forgot a whole separate species in this story. Denisovans, discovered from one tiny pinky bone in a Siberian cave of all things. They're Neanderthals' even more mysterious cousins, and some populations in Asia carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. So for a while there, it wasn't just humans and Neanderthals running around. You had at least 3 different kinds of human alive on the same planet, occasionally bumping into each other. Prehistoric Earth was apparently a lot more crowded than the cartoons make it look.
The timeline keeps shifting too, the more carefully people dated. For years, the assumption was that humans and Neanderthals overlapped in Europe for maybe a couple thousand years before Neanderthals vanished, a fairly quick handoff. More recent, more careful dating work has stretched or squeezed that window, depending on the exact region, but the general shape stays the same everywhere you look. This wasn't a quick war. It was thousands of years of both groups just sort of existing in the same general area, on and off, not annihilating each other in one dramatic final battle. Climate doesn't help their case either, if we're being fair to the weather as a suspect. This was the tail end of an ice age, and conditions back then swung around wildly. Warm spells and brutal cold snaps stacked close together, sometimes within a single lifetime. Neanderthals leaned hard on large game for food, and when those animal populations took a hit from the swings, that's a genuinely rough time to also be down to a couple thousand people total. And get this, recent genetic work even suggests Europe's very last Neanderthals mostly traced back to one shrinking refuge population tucked into southwestern France that had already lost most of its older genetic diversity before it ever spread back out. So even the last of the Neanderthals weren't really the broad, varied population they'd once been. They were more like the last surviving branch of a tree that had already been quietly dying back for tens of thousands of years. One more, slightly darker fact before we move on, just so we're being fair to everybody here. Neanderthals weren't exactly angels to each other either. At a cave in Spain called El Cedrón, researchers found Neanderthal bones with cut marks that look a lot like butchery marks on other Neanderthals. So whatever was happening to this species, it wasn't purely a story of innocent victims and one outside villain. They had their own bad days too. Now, if you want to argue humans really did have a hand in finishing this off, you're not just making it up. There's at least one genuinely unsettling piece of evidence on that side. There's a Neanderthal called Shanidar III, found in Iraq, who has a deep slice wound on one of his ribs. Researchers actually tested this with crossbows and pig carcasses, like a full forensic crime show episode. And the wound's angle and depth line up surprisingly well with a thrown projectile weapon. A weapon type Neanderthals, as far as anyone can tell, mostly weren't using. Humans were. So yeah, there's at least one case where it genuinely looks like a Neanderthal might have been killed by exactly the kind of weapon our side specialized in. That's a real fair point, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But, and this is the part that keeps it from being case closed, even the researchers admit the wound could just as easily be an accident, a hunting mishap, or honestly, even Neanderthal on Neanderthal violence. One mysterious rib injury, found decades ago, is genuinely the single best smoking gun anyone has for direct violence between the two species. After all this digging, all this DNA, all this debate, that's basically it. One rib. That's the part that still bugs me a little, honestly. For a story we tell so confidently, the actual hard evidence for violence is incredibly thin. And the more time I spent on this, the more it stopped feeling like a story about who won. It started feeling like a story about how extinction rarely looks like the dramatic ending we picture. No final battle, no last stand on some windswept hill, just a small, fragile population, already worn thin by hundreds of thousands of years of isolation and inbreeding, meeting a changing climate and a new neighbor at about the worst possible time. And even then, it didn't fully end. Some of it just folded into us, quietly, genetically. A little bit of Neanderthal showing up in your immune system, in mine, in basically anyone whose ancestors once left Africa. Not as a trophy, not as a footnote, just as a quiet, ongoing fact about who we are. So maybe the real ending here isn't we won. Maybe it's closer to we were never as separate from them as the story made it sound. Anyway, that's where this one left me. A little less smug about being human, honestly, and a little more aware of who's still quietly riding along in here with me.